Well, good evening and a happy Shabbat. My pleasure to be with you. It's interesting what's happening in California, well south of where you are, Kirk. Thousand Oaks, for a reference from where I used to be. I used to be in Montecito, just south of Santa Barbara. And as you go down the coast, the next community would be Ventura, and then after Ventura, Oxnard. After Oxnard, Camarillo, and then after Camarillo, you enter Thousand Oaks. And it's the place where a ex-Marine, combat veteran, a machine gunnist, I understand, decided that the fun thing to do would be to gun down 11 unarmed people at a nightclub. And it is also the place of a raging fire that is completely out of control between it and Malibu. But we do have a new form of terrorist, according to the Donald. Sick puppies. That's what he called the shooter. And it's interesting that we would dismiss the Marine as a sick puppy when this fellow got checked out by the Marine psychologist and said, "Oh, he's just fine." The kind of people that we have manning America's primary weapon systems, and yet he thought it would be just swell to use a gun to gun down unarmed and innocent civilians. Makes you feel really warm and fuzzy that like-minded souls are throughout America's military.
That's the same work pool that they fill up our police force with as well.
Yeah. You know, it's correct. It's one of the reasons why there is just no truth in America's police forces. They're have a propensity to be dishonest. And it's not just my opinion on this, or not my experience on this. As I said last week, I did meet one of America's premier attorneys, and he was talking about, he's a defense attorney, and he says, it's true that the majority of the clients that I have are guilty, and I represent them because it's what the Constitution requires. But he said the thing that always makes it possible is and necessary is because the police who testify are almost always dishonest. And all too often, they find an individual they don't like and they frame them. And they just pile lie after lie. But the U.S. War College did a study on the U.S. military and found that from the enlisted man all the way up to the highest officer, their go-to strategy has been and continues to be to lie. So it's a sad situation that we saw in that nightclub, and some were searching initially to blame his outburst on post-traumatic stress syndrome. Last I heard, there were 600,000 American vets claiming to have suffered from post-traumatic stress syndrome. Most were never in combat. And they do so because they get free access to drugs, and they are paid up to $6,000 a month for the treatment. Boy, I tell you what, if stress is the cause of mental illness, then we're all in trouble, because without stress, we don't accomplish anything. All our systems are designed to be stressed. We don't develop character, backbone, muscle unless we are stressed. But nonetheless, that's where we find ourselves. I do have some good news, at least partial good news. Over the last week, I have finished translating 2 new chapters, Isaiah, Yeshaya, 15 and 16, and I have now completed the commentary for Yeshaya, Isaiah 15, and hope in the next few days to finish the commentary for Yeshaya 16, at least in the next 3 or 4 days. So it's nice to be back writing. Within a week's time, I should have a new chapter ready, something I haven't done in a while. So that has been gratifying, and I hope that as soon as I get the new chapter done, that I'll begin to go through all of my inbox on Yada Yahweh emails. I had been quite good at keeping up with them until the significant changes that I've gone through in my life, where I've just, moved and separated and done so many different things that it was difficult to find a place and get all of my tools together to be able to write and translate and compose and also respond to emails that I have been done a poor job here these last few months, but I'll get back at it, I would say, within the next few weeks once I get this first chapter out. So I apologize to those that I have not responded to. I hope to resolve that shortly. Kirk and JB, we're going to begin where we left off last week. Yahshua Isaiah 3:8. It and what follows is an overt, unmistakable indictment against religion. And it continues. In fact, as I've finished translating Yahshua 15 and 16, which many people would think is an indictment of Moab, it has really nothing to do with Moab at all, but what Moab represents. And questionable father is what Moab would translate as. And once I publish the chapter, you'll all have a chance to see who I think the questionable father is. But there's 2 entire chapters of Yahshua that are devoted exclusively to the consequence of being religious, of being political, of being militaristic. And so this is where we find ourselves in Yahshua 3. And what surprises me, and just to put this in context before we return to the text, I guess there's a reason that neither Jews nor Christians nor Muslims want any part of the so-called Old Testament. They all want to claim that it's inspired by their God. They all refer to it. Yeah, but they don't like that God very much, because guess what? That God hates religion. It's pretty easy to see why they're not real fond of that God or of what he has to say. But that was
the judgmental God.
Yeah, he is judgmental. That is right. Boy, does he ever say that in the 15th and 16th chapter. He is overtly judgmental. And he wants us to be judgmental, which is interesting too. But it's amazing that with a prophet as loved by Christians as Isaiah, that Christians have just managed to ignore the overall thrust of the prophecy, which is to condemn their religion and every other. It's just astonishing to me. I mean, it's like Christians carry around the Torah in their Bible, and yet not only don't pay any attention to it, they reject it. How could you be a rational person and do that? Anyway, this begins, for indeed, key. Key is KY, beginning of a lot of Hebrew sentences. And it's kind of a diminished form of henna. Henna was the one we chased for chapter over chapter, trying to see why God would use it, and God uses henna to bring our attention to the single most important things that he has to say. Look up, pay attention, henna. Right. Well, key is emphasize this is true. There's an express reason I'm conveying this to you. This is a consequence of what has been said before. So, for indeed, key, because for this express reason, Jerusalem, which is the source from which teaching, guidance, direction, and instruction regarding reconciliation and restoration flow. Now, it's just an interesting name. Most people would tell you if you were to ask, what does Jerusalem mean? Mm-hmm. Now, most people wouldn't have a clue that there's no J in Hebrew, and that it can't be Jerusalem.
No.
That alone would be mind-boggling to them. But they would tell you that they'd look it up, and the first thing they would say is it means city of peace. Well, no, it doesn't. Yara is the beginning of the word. It's a compound of Yara and Shalom.
Shalom.
Yeah, and Yara is the basis of Torah. It means source from which teaching, guidance, instruction, and direction flow. And it's the basis of probably the most important word in all of Hebrew, Torah.
Yeah.
Yahweh himself tells us that it's the verbal root of it.
Yeah.
And then Shalom means to reconcile. Now, it's true that if you reconcile a relationship, you have peace.
Peace.
But it's a derivative of the meaning. It's not the meaning. And the meaning is really important because something happened in Jerusalem that is essential for us to know and understand. It is the place where we find guidance regarding reconciliation with our Creator. Now, it is the place where Yahweh fulfilled and confirmed the covenant with Abraham. I don't think there's anything more important than that. It is the place where he enabled the benefits of the covenant by fulfilling and honoring his commitment to Abraham to serve as the Pesach lamb, and then went on to fulfill the first four mikra, Pesach, Matzah, Bikurim, and Shabuah, enabling us to be immortal, perfected, adopted, enriched, and empowered. That is the source from which reconciliation flows. And there's a fellow that is equally important to us, maybe the most important person to us based upon his life, what Yahweh had to say about him and what he had to say about Yahweh, whose home was right there in the midst of Jerusalem, David. And so, to an enormous extent, guidance regarding reconciliation and restoration flow out of the words that Dode has penned and sung for us. That's why it's so important to not only transliterate the words correctly so that you know how they're written, how they sound, but that you also translate them. You're not going to find God in the Vatican, in Mecca, in New York or Washington, in London or in Paris. You're going to find him in Jerusalem. That's what the word means. For indeed, Jerusalem, Yahweh says, has stumbled, and for a time faltered. This is the Hebrew word underlined is kashal, means staggered and succumbed, having been brought down and overthrown as a result of wavering. Steadfast, upright are concepts that are important to Yahweh. Those who waver, those who don't make a commitment, those who think that they can accept man's way and still be accepted by God, those are the people that, from Yahweh's position, have stumbled and faltered. And then he says, and Yahudah, those who relate to Yah, those who are related to Yah, as well as Yahweh's beloved, has fallen. I don't think anything would make God sadder than having Yahudah go from a higher to a lower position and status, being out of control, losing their perspective and place within the relationship. And they did so not because of bad behavior. They didn't do so because, according to the Catholic Church, they killed Jesus, which, of course, there was no Jesus, and man can't kill God, and it was actually the Romans, of which the Roman Catholic Church is based, that murdered the body of Yosha. But it wasn't for that reason. Because of their words. Because of their slanderous language, their speech, their tongue, what they have consumed from Lashan, their slander. You know, Kirk, you looked up Talmud. You were just interested to see what the basis of it is in Hebrew, because that would be the primary source of Hebrew slander.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that that you've got most lexicons telling you that Talmud is the Hebrew word for instruction.
Right.
And, you know,
like
Lakem is the, yeah, and you say, wait a minute, you know, Lamed means to teach, to instruct. So, what is it that would cause them to change it to Talmud if there are at least a half a dozen Hebrew words that convey that meaning? But that's not what you found when you did your research, was it, Kirk?
No, it's the same twisting that started in the Garden of Eden, Yarden. I mean, they didn't get kicked. She didn't get kicked out because she repeated what Yahweh said. She twisted it, and the Talmud is just a simple. It's not simple. It's a very complicated, overwhelming twisting of everything that Yah said. But so I thought it would be interesting since we're talking about religion, and this is the major tool that they use. It dates back a couple of search engines, or one search engine rather, and the Greek was interesting because it said this is a Egyptian origin, and they used the names. They associated the names with the Talmud of Janus and Jambres, and those are the two Egyptians who were the magicians that wielded the snakes, you know, when Moshe and Aaron were in the Pharaoh's court. So that's
probably good association.
This little thing is just associates all the words that are associated with Talmud. So, and then I thought that was kind of cool, and then I went back to the Hebrews, and gaza, which was a verb which means to cut or sever a relationship, or to take, as in to take something away from someone, from guz, which is to pass away, pass by, or over, also to fail, to shear off, or cut away. Gazah, related to gazah, the verb, to shear the sheep, or to destroy the sheep. Then you had another word that popped up, and it was dur, which is a circle. And I always associated that with a sun symbol. There's Hanika, which is a chain or a necklace, which we'll find later in the chapter that you wrote, where you discovered about the chain and the symbols of the chains that people wear in their jewelry. Agagi was an interesting one. I hadn't run across that before, and the people, which were a name of the people of the Amalekites of Hammam, and we know all about the Amalekites. That became basically the major group that settled down in Arabia. They became the Muslims. And also the root of that is to bind, and to be, is always religion. And then it went on, just forgive me, it's a little long. I don't mean to be too long-winded, but gazal, which is to sever, to take, which we get, but the roots to that, or the relationships, words to that, is to move or to remove dust via a broom or by the wind. So we do something to dust and then blow it away. And that makes me think about the wheat in the chaff, where you throw it up and the dust blows away and then the good stuff stays. And the root for that, a slight variation on that, is plucking feathers or shearing sheep to strip something of their covering, which is a good metaphor, and to fleece, to take them away from by force. So and there were more. I got tired of writing, to be honest with you. I was just doing it out of fun. But there's not a positive connotation in anything that's associated with Talmud.
Yeah, it's like they show a system of diacritical marks.
Right.
And you look it up, and of course what it really means is to deceive. Mm-hmm. And these guys were pretty much in your face. Okay. So their slanderous language,
the whole idea of slanderous language, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the Talmud originally conceived as a way of codifying the quote-unquote oral law?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that was what it was originally presented to be, was an oral law as opposed to the written. But, it gets back to the fact, of course, that the written Torah says don't add anything to this, don't subtract anything from it. So it automatically presupposes that there can't be a second law. And Torah doesn't mean law anyway, it means teaching. But beyond that, since writing is the best way to preserve and convey a message, the most reliable way to convey and preserve a message, why would you have an oral teaching side by side with the written? That would make the oral vastly inferior. But also, when you read the Torah, there are so many things in the Torah that get into minute detail. Mm-hmm. And if there was something really important that needed to be conveyed that wasn't conveyed, do you think that maybe some of the minute details would be shifted aside for those big points?
Yeah.
Or just like the so-called Christian New Testament. How can the two texts that differ be ascribed to the same God?
Mm-hmm. They can't.
Where's the room for a Talmud, a oral law, when it is in conflict with the original written Torah? It just can't be. It's one of the dumbest things smart people have ever promoted.
Maimonides claimed, each of the rabbis gets a vote, and then God gets a vote.
That was a kibbah. Yeah, that was a kibbah. That was his strategy. Yeah, he decided that since Yahowah, that was his whole thought process, since Yahowah is a supporter of free will, and therefore choice being essential to God's commitment and mannerisms. He said, well, then if free will and choice matter, then we ought to take a vote. And if there are three or more rabbis and just one God, if the rabbis vote one way and God chooses another, well, the rabbis will prevail. That's like saying democracy.
Let's all embrace democracy.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, let's just see. There's a reason that no democracy has survived more than 250 years. It's democracy. You don't get an amalgamation of truth by taking the pulse of the majority. The majority
So
is almost always
is 2 wolves
wrong.
and a sheep voting on what to eat for dinner.
Oh,
Yeah. So their slanderous language and their actions, ma'alahem, things they do and the services they provide, their deeds, their endeavors, their practices against, it's interesting, it's mal is the basis of it, mal, malevolent, malignant. Their actions against directed in opposition to, and that's corrected from the Great Isaiah Scroll because the Masoretic text has towards Yahweh. It is, you can do a lot of things which God will overlook. Doesn't really care about. God doesn't like it when we cheat one another, or when we harm one another, or when we lie to one another. But when we lie about Him, especially when you're amongst the chosen people and you lie about Him, when you do things that are counter to Him so as to lead others away from Him, that He cares about. And He cares about that for an express reason, which is that the actions and words of those who claim to speak for God are those that lead most people away from God. And so it's because of their slanderous language and their actions against Yahweh. There's this myth in Christianity and in Islam that God condemns people based upon bad behavior because they're homosexual, because they're promiscuous, because they're not charitable enough, they're hateful. There's no hint of that here.
Well, look at Paul's letters. He has a ton of stuff where he's like, don't do this, don't do that. It's all about 99% of everything Paul talked about was how you act toward other people, or how you act toward his group. Right. It wasn't about your relationship with Yahweh. It wasn't about how you act toward Yahweh. It was all about man's behavior toward man. That's part of the reason Christianity is so obsessed with this good behavior idea.
Yeah, I guess so. But that's not what God is rebelling against. He didn't say, boy, you have fallen because you treat each other poorly. He doesn't say you have fallen because you lie to one another. He doesn't say you have fallen because you don't take good care of your babies. He says you have fallen because you gamble too much, because you drink too much, because you swear too much. No. You have fallen because of your slanderous language in opposition to Yahweh, and because of your actions in opposition to Yahweh. What God cares about. All of us can have any conversation we want to during the day, and if we're just talking, I'm trying to get a boat so that it gets out of the shipyard, and I'm having lots of meetings on it, and as I talk to people about Torah, what I say really is not something that God's going to pay any attention to. Mm-hmm. It's just everyday stuff. When you teach your art class, it's not something you're not expecting God to be sitting in one of the chairs on the back and listening to everything you say and saying, Kirk, you weren't very nice the way you critiqued that person's work. There's a demerit for you. You were a little harsh as you were driving to work today, JB. That's not nice. That's not very sociable of you. No. What He cares about is what do we say about Him? Because that's what matters.
It's the only one of the 10 instructions He carved in stone that He says He will not forgive.
Yeah.
Demeaning and belittling the value of His name. Yeah. Unforgivable. And what is if you were about it from what Yahweh has said, the single greatest crime ever perpetrated by humankind, and especially by his people, is to remove his name from his testimony and to replace it with the adversary's name and title, the Lord.
Easily.
Yeah.
Direct violation of the third statement he etched in stone. The only one he said is unforgivable. God would view that as slanderous. He would consider that as an action that is against him.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with regard to rebelling bitterly against and defying the manifestation of his power and presence. You know, when we were talking about this last week,
mm-hmm.
when you use a word that is addressing a verb that's addressing an entire community, because this is Jerusalem and Yehuda.
Yehuda. Mm-hmm.
Okay? This isn't Josh, Reuben, and Benjamin. This is all of Yehuda, all of the residents of Jerusalem. It's a lot of people. When you have a lot of people rebelling bitterly and defying Yahweh's manifestation of power, then there is only one construct within the human society and family that would be capable of mass or ubiquitous, popular, prevalent rebellion against God. Only one. Religion.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, Judaism. That's it. And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say what he is saying here is that Judaism is rebellion. That God views it as bitter defiance. He looks at the Jewish religion as hostile and anguishing and contentious and obstinate, recalcitrant, venomous. Because of its slanderous language and its
translated this,
how did it
and it makes no sense. The King James says, to provoke the eyes of his glory. What does that even mean?
Means nothing. It means I don't want to deal with it.
I was just curious how they translated this, so I pulled it up, and that is, for Jerusalem is ruined and Judah has fallen because their tongues and their doings are against the Lord, to provoke the eyes of his glory. I don't even know, I can't even think of what that could possibly mean. Provoke the eyes of his glory.
I don't know.
Another one will change the subject.
Mara, I'm sure you guys have looked up Mara. It means to rebel bitterly.
Yeah.
To be hostile to be contentious.
Mm-hmm. Defiance of. Yeah.
Yeah. And kabod is the manifestation of power.
Yes.
It's the value over all significance of something. So they rebelled bitterly against the overall significance and the glorious splendor, the tremendous honor, the power and presence of Yahweh. And of course, they made the single greatest mistake you could possibly make. They replaced Yahweh's name with the satanic title, the Lord. And Lashon does mean tongue, but it means tongue in the same way we use tongue. You know, what tongue did so-and-so speak?
Mm-hmm.
You know, English, French, in this case, Hebrew. They're slanderous language, Lashon him.
Okay.
So it's you got to render the words correctly if you're going to understand what God is saying here, and it's essential to know what is it that that caused Jerusalem to stumble and Yehudah to fall. It was because of three things: their language, their actions, both of which were in opposition to Yahweh, and their bitter rebellion against his power and presence. And the last one really is the crux of all religion, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Christianity is based on Paul. Paul rebelled against Yahweh's power and presence.
Yeah.
You know, Muhammad rebelled against Yahweh's power and presence, elevating Satan to God as Allah. Judaism replaced Yahweh with Hashem, and they created a rabbinic religion where the rabbis have the final word. It's all rebellion against the power and presence of Yahweh. And that's really one of the differences between us and those who are religious.
Mm-hmm.
We celebrate the power and the presence of Yahweh. We see his power and his presence, his overall significance, his splendor, his honor, his abundance, his reward, and every letter of every word we translate. We celebrate his name.
Yeah. I don't want to ruin your thought, but
let's go ahead.
Really, Malal, from Alal. The only reason I wrote this down is because it says one of the meanings is to play a child, and I thought that was so funny because you started out with these people acting like children. Now the rest of it is malicious and horrible and fairly abused and on and on and on and on. But if you take those last 5 words in that thing, there's nothing good about it. I mean, it's just horrible, horrible, horrible. Slanderous, babblers is one of the things. Let's on.
And even if you don't lashon, you don't render it as and this lashon him, which if you just say their tongues or their language and you remove slanderous from it, which you can do, because it's possible that their tongue and their language could convey something that's not slanderous. In this particular case, it's pretty obvious that it is slanderous, but just take that out for a moment. It's the difference between their language and Yahweh's.
Mm-hmm.
It's because the Talmud is their language. It's their words versus Yahweh's.
Our religion.
So the very fact that it's the problem, the reason they've fallen is that they're conveying their language, not conveying Yahweh's language. Yahweh has nothing against about any actions. He wants us to engage. But it's not his actions that they're following, that they're engaging in. It's their own. And so it's their words and their actions which Yahweh looks at as rebellion. This takes us to Isaiah 3:9. The bias and prejudicial expressions, the lack of judgment, astonishingly ironic statements, and the thoughtless appearance shown on their faces testify against them. Serves as their response is a declaration and answer bearing witness against them, in addition to the fact that they are wrong. Chata at him. I don't think that Yahweh knows what the vast preponderance of people look like, but he knows his children. And we have, as humans, on the basis of our Creator, very expressive faces. I have a home here in Fort Lauderdale. It sits on a canal that's part of the intercoastal, and I have a neighbor that has a really beautiful home across the canal. I'm in the just renting it, but I'm in the least pretentious home on the street. It's one of with the my neighbors would call a teardown. I find it charming and comfortable, but my neighbor's house is probably $30 million, and I look out over a house that's just across the waterway from me that's $50 million, and it is a lot of really prestigious homes in the neighborhood. Mine's just lot value, but as we were shouting across the canal, the thing I was really trying to see is the expression on his face. What's the guy like? He lives in a $30 million house. He designed it and built it. What's he like? What was his expression as he was talking to me? His expression was more important even than the words. His expression was really down to earth and friendly and inviting. But Yahweh really dislikes the expression on his children's faces when it's belligerent, when they testify against them. And I got to tell you that I have witnessed it so many times, seen it on faces that are we just know there's disease festering inside, religious disease, political disease, and they're prejudicial expressions there. And this is kind of an interesting word because it also means astonishingly ironic statements. If you read the Talmud, that's what we were hinting at before. What the Talmud says and what Yahweh says are in conflict with one another. What Paul writes in the Christian New Testament and what Yahweh says in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms are diametrically opposed to one another. The Quran contradicts the Torah, and yet it claims to be conveying the testimony of the same God. How astonishingly ironic is that? Here each of these three religions claim that they have the path to God, and yet God says that all religions lead away from him. It's astonishing. It's ironic. It's thoughtless. And God sees it written all over their faces.
How do preachers... I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and the worst part of it all is you just get down to beyond the expression on their faces, they are wrong. They're offensive in nature as a result of missing the way. They're just wrong. The Talmud, the Mishnah, they're wrong. The Christian New Testament, wrong. The Quran, wrong. It's just all wrong. What were you going to say, Kirk?
No, I was just going to say, when you were a Christian, and it bothered me, and I'm sure it must have triggered something in you. I can't tell you how many times people would have, preachers would have this little debate on reconciling Peter to Paul. And I, being rather ignorant at the time, I couldn't figure out why would they have to reconcile? Why would they have to be reconciled? Why do you have to even speak on it if they're both inspired? Why wouldn't the word be the same? Because you don't say that about, Yochanan, or they would, obviously John and Peter are on the same page.
Right.
James, which would have been on the same page. So why is this in Acts, this thing where they bring him here to straighten him out or confront him about his declarations and his speaking? So that should be so obvious. And if they can sit there and talk about that for hours and days and books.
Oh, I've got something that's far more obvious. Two things that are far more obvious, and it's never brought up. Because they'll debate, how do you reconcile Paul and Peter? And, of course, you can't.
No.
But here's the question I have for you.
Okay.
How do you reconcile Yosha and Paul? How can Paul have claimed to have spoken for Yosha when he only quotes him once? Yeah. And even then, he took what he said out of context and misrepresented it.
Yeah.
claim to be inspired by a God that they constantly contradict. But I, Paul, say.
You can't.
So how do you reconcile Paul and Yahowah? You can't. How do you reconcile Paul and Yosha? You can't. But have you ever heard a Christian debate on reconciling Paul and Jesus or Paul and the Lord ever?
No.
Have you ever heard a Christian try to explain why Paul admitted that he was demon-possessed?
That never came up, ever.
No, they'll debate constantly what was the thorn in his side. They'll never even consider that.
Without looking at
not
the thorn.
possibly
of course. And what does it say? It says the thorn in my side was a messenger. That would be a malak
Demon.
from Hasatan.
Satan.
Demon-possessed. How can you be so oblivious? It's just astonishing to me.
Yeah.
It's the don't question nature of faith.
Yeah, they're just wrong. And that's the problem with religion. It's why I rewrote the opening chapter of Questioning Paul. I said, okay, Christian, just before you try to deal with this book, because you'll find every reason in the first chapter to set it down so that you don't have to confront the fact that it proves conclusively that Paul was a complete and utter fraud. He's the plague of death. False in every possible way. But why don't you start with, here are the 20 claims of Christianity that have no chance whatsoever of being true. And it just lays them all out. From someone being named Jesus, to there being a Christ, to God's name being Yahweh, or being the Lord versus Yahweh, to man killing God, to there being a religion that was created by God. It just goes on and on and on. There's 20 of them. All there in the first chapter. You've been told the following, but it's not only untrue, it cannot be true. They're just wrong. But I guess the nature of religion is that many wrongs make a faith.
Well put.
Yeah. Many rights lead to knowing. Many wrongs lead to faith.
Yeah, well, got to have faith, huh?
That's
Similar
why they use
to
the carrot and stick approach with heaven and hell. It's all about that threat. Don't question your faith or you'll end up in hell. You condition kids from a young age not to question anything they're told by their pastor. They won't, because they're terrified that they're going to go to hell. Mm-hmm. It's indoctrination.
Yeah, and the truth is,
if you
question your religion, you will absolutely be spared from hell.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And that if you promote your religion, you'll have an express ticket there. But that's only according to the creator of the universe. Similar to Kadon, Sodom is but it's C-A-D-O-M in Hebrew, from the C-D-M root. It means to scorch. Similar to Sodom, Kadom, they go above and beyond to justify their contrarian position. They don't make any attempt to conceal or deny it. It is amazing to me that if you look at Judaism, the difference between Judaism and Yahweh's Torah is maybe 30%. I mean, the Talmud is comprised of arguments on the Torah. Maimonides, 6 613 mitzvah or mitzvot. I don't know if he calls them mitzvah or mitzvots, but his 613 laws, if you will, are all derived from the Torah. I mean, sure, he is misstating them, he's taking them out of context, he's misinterpreting them, but that's still the basis of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they still know that the Moed Mikra are important. They still know that the Shabbat is important. They still know that the written Torah is important. They know that Moshe is important. They know that the prophets are important. They know that Yisrael is the promised land. They know that Yahudim matter. They know that it's Mount Moriah and Jerusalem that are the center of God's attention. They know all of those things and more. They know that Hebrew is the language of revelation. They know they're the chosen people. The difference between Judaism and Yahweh's teaching is, 30, 40%. I mean, you can't be different and expect Yahweh to accept you. Now, the fact is that you can be wrong about many things, but you can't be wrong about the nature of the covenant and the nature of the Moed Mikra and the nature of Yahweh's name and what he is expecting from us.
What Torah means.
Yeah, what Torah means. But here it's being said that they are contrarian in their positions and do not conceal or deny it. Christianity is about 70% erroneous. It's about 30% of Christianity that at least parrots positions that are true. But it's twice as erroneous as Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
So if God is upset at Jews for contrarian positions, the Christian New Testament, Paul's letters in particular, are wholly contrarian.
Mm-hmm.
Paul's letters are probably 90% contrarian with Yahweh's testimony. So 3 times worse than Judaism. So if God is upset with the Jews in Judaism, just think how much more he'd be upset with Christians and Christianity. And of course, by the time you get to Islam, it's 99.9% contrarian. I mean, there's not enough truth to fool a fool.
I want you to point out the 1%.
Yeah, well, I said 99.9.
Yeah,
I don't know. You'd have to look long and hard.
You and I.
Well, actually, the reason there is some is that when Muhammad ran out of material, when he was plagiarizing and bastardizing the Hanif, the pagans down in Yemen, who were, by the way, plagiarizing rabbinic teaching. Then he turned to rabbis, as the Hanifs originally did and ultimately did, and he had them recite Talmud stories to him, which he used those Talmud stories. He had a really terrible memory, but he used the Talmud stories and twisted them to suit his agenda and transformed them, bastardized them to suit his liking. And so, since he was, the Talmud is let's say it's much of it is a reasonable interpretation of the Torah, and not all of it, but some of it. And Muhammad got some of the Talmud right. That maybe there's 1% in there. That's true. They don't try to conceal it or deny it. Yeah, that's true. That's when you talk to a Jew, they'll say that being Torah observant means that we observe the Talmud. They're open about it.
Yes.
They don't pretend to be that the Torah that they observe is Yahweh's. Woe. Woe to their souls. They have brought a distressful and miserable recompense upon themselves. Yeah, their soul.
That's frightening.
God's not smiting their bodies. He's not truncating their lives, not spanking them or tormenting them. He says the consequence of this, of their speech and their actions in opposition to him, their rebellion against him, their contrarian position against him, the consequence of all of that is that their souls are going to suffer distress. There's going to be a recompense, an accounting for their souls. Now, I don't think that would be true for the vast preponderance of Muslims and Christians. I don't think God cares. They're not his chosen people. And so long as they were not amongst the clerics that are promoting the religion, then there's probably not going to be any recompense. But with Yahowah, the Yehudim, Yisrael in particular, but Yehudim most especially, they're the conveyors of his message. And for them to be in rebellion, that's
terrible.
That's horrible. It's I've dealt with this in my own very small, puny way, but I realize that because there's so few people out there that are willing to translate large swaths of Yahweh's testimony and to correlate it to the oldest text of the Dead Sea Scrolls and to do it in an amplified fashion and to share each word so that you can look up and verify them for yourselves and then have an open and really honest discussion about what the words mean and what God is conveying when it's translated in a more complete and more accurate fashion. That I'm always concerned that something I will write or say will bring discredit to me, that it will compromise my integrity. It's one of the reasons why I vehemently opposed to conspiracies, because they are this giant sinkhole to which credibility is destroyed and never emerges. That's why I'm reluctant to take a political position. You really have to be careful with your credibility if you're going to be sharing Yahweh's testimony. There's a responsibility that goes along with it. And all we're doing here is more accurately translating what he's inspired others to write. So our responsibility is a tiny fraction of what the responsibility was of Yahudah. They are the messengers of the living God. We're just translators of that message. Those observing that message, thinking about it, conveying it, pondering the implications. And yet, I'm always concerned that I don't want to ever say or do anything that brings disrepute to my credibility, because there just aren't enough people doing this. And so you've got a whole group of people that are not only acting in a way that is destructive of their credibility, and they're the messengers for Yahweh, they're making no attempt to even care that they're doing it. They don't care. That's a horrible position to be in. So, woe indeed. Because of this, they've brought a miserable recompense, a consequence upon their very souls. Say to those who are right, indeed, truth is beneficial and appropriate, because they shall consume and be nourished by the fruit of their actions. Truth really is what matters. Being right is what counts. And if you accept the truth, embrace the truth, know the truth, understand the truth, and then act upon it, then your words and deeds are aligned with dotes. They're accepted by Yahweh, vindicated, upright, righteous.
My favorite sayings I tell people is, I don't care who I offend with the truth.
Yeah.
Because it's the truth.
Right. Yeah, that was my position all when I was exposing and condemning Islam with the Islamic scriptures. You know, if you're offended by it, that's not my problem.
Yeah. Now, prove
what
it
I'm
wrong,
telling you is the truth. This is what they say. The same thing to a Christian. You know, I'm not going to make no apology. If we are accurately, and because we're accurately translating the word of Yahweh, if that word impugns them, which it does regularly, we make no apology for that. Truth matters. Say to those who are right, indeed, the truth is beneficial and appropriate. You're always right to convey the truth. And understand that when you do that, you're going to be unpopular. Understand when you convey the truth, the vast preponderance of people can disagree with you. Truth has never been popular, ever, in the whole of human history.
What an odd thing.
But it's appropriate.
I mean, I know it's true, but what an odd thing to say.
Yeah.
I've always loved to debate.
Why would that be?
Yeah, I've always loved to debate. I love, and people were like, well, you just don't like to admit when you're wrong. No, I don't like being wrong. I debate because if I'm wrong, I want someone to prove me wrong. I'm not going to admit I'm wrong just because you tell me I'm wrong. If you can lay out an argument and prove to me that I am wrong, I want that because I hate being wrong.
Right.
I really do. But that's why I love debate. It's not because I don't want to be wrong. It's not because I don't want to admit I'm wrong. It's because I want to be proven wrong.
Yeah.
And, if you can't
I love to be
wrong,
right,
then
and the best way to be right is to engage in discourse such that, and study such that you learn the truth and can embrace and accept it. And sometimes when you study and sometimes when you convey a message, you learn that that's not true. And so the most beneficial thing you can possibly do is divorce yourself of that which was not true and accept that which is. Make a correction. It feels good to jettison something that you previously thought to be true that has been shown to be false. I love it, just like you guys do. I love it when somebody can show that what I have written or thought or conveyed is not true, because it gives you a chance to correct the record. Well, none of us want to be wrong.
Yeah. If I couldn't admit that I was wrong, I wouldn't be where I am today in my relationship with Yahweh, because I came from a point of view of there is no God. For the most part, I was borderline agnostic, borderline atheist, and it was only when arguing with and talking to people when evidence showed, I'm like, okay, I'm wrong. Now I'm sitting here. I spend all the free time I can translating scripture and commenting on it, and because I realized I was wrong, and I'm like, okay, well now I know there is a God. Now what can be more important than finding out what this God had to say?
Yes. No, and I can tell you, I was wrong about most everything. And so this whole journey is about letting go of what was wrong and embracing what's proven right. Say to those who are right, Sadak, upright and vindicated. Indeed, truth, Toba, is good. It's valuable. It's advisable. It's correct. It's pleasing. It's enjoyable. It's prosperous. Truth is appropriate. This is the antithesis of political correctness.
Yeah.
Political correctness has no interest in the truth. But to God, it's truth that matters. Truth is good. It's valuable. It's advisable. Truth is correct. It's pleasing. You will be nourished by the truth. And the fruit of the truth is that our actions are consistent with what Yahweh is requesting of us. That's Isaiah 3:10. Moving on, 3:11. Woe. Uh-oh. Oi. Alas. Emphasizing the intensity of the personal estrangement and resulting distress. For the consequence, law, of being wrong and being malevolent, rasha, of being opposed to the truth and in violation of the standard, in conflict with the Torah, is bad. Ra'ah. It's harmful. It's unfavorable. It's distressful. It's disagreeable. It's displeasing. It's injurious. The consequence of being wrong is injurious. Because indeed, this consequence is deserved based upon what has been done through this influence. It is an appropriate recompense for him. That's laying it on the line. Unambiguous, clear. What God has just said is that, whoa, there is a consequence of being wrong. And that should be obvious, but yet we live in a society where there is no consequence of being wrong. In fact, there's a consequence of being right. If you're wrong in our society, you're embraced.
Right.
Promoting homosexuality as a value, as a virtue, as opposed to no one cares what you do. Just keep it to yourself, and if that makes you happy, well, that's your thing. But promoting it as superior, that's wrong. Promoting it as normal, that's wrong. Promoting multiculturalism, it's wrong. Conveying the idea that hate is the underlying problem of society is just flat out wrong. Mm-hmm. Hate's necessary to be compassionate. Unless you despise those who are harmful to others, then you have no compassion, no sense of right and wrong. Mm-hmm. From God's view, and that's the only one that matters, there's a consequence of being wrong. And that consequence is harmful. It's bad. And the reason that it's bad is because of those that it influences, in addition to your own soul.
Yeah.
And this consequence, from God's point of view, it's deserved. He has given us the instruction, the guidance, the teaching that we need to be right. There is no excuse to be wrong. To be wrong, you have chosen to either ignore or reject Yahweh's teaching. So, he's saying that if you're wrong, then the consequence of being wrong is deserved. It's your fault. It's not God's fault. He's made it available. It's not anybody else's fault. It's your fault. If you're a Roman Catholic, if you're an evangelical Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Buddhist, if you're an atheist, it's your fault. The evidence is ubiquitous. The truth is easily verifiable. And therefore, there's a consequence of being wrong. And the reason there's a consequence is because of what lies do to influence others.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when the religious Jew says that God's name is unpronounceable and that we ought not pronounce it, our reverence for it keeps us from pronouncing it because, well, no one knows how to pronounce it anymore. Well, that's just wrong. But the consequence of that in terms of misleading people and leading people away from Yahweh is very significant, and God's not going to overlook it.
I wrote a friend today, responded back to an email that I got, and I mentioned to him that I was looking up a theologian who said, Yahweh's name, it wasn't introduced until the story of Moshe. So he met Moshe, which is absurd, but he says that. And it's a shame, he said, that he didn't tell us what it meant. And I wrote back and I said, and I was writing this person back, and I said, well, if you go by the verbal root of the word, then you could figure out how you exist. It's the three letters out of the four, that are in there. And then if you knew then if you took it one step further and you actually looked at the original letters, so you could see what the pictographs actually say. The only one missing is the part that is actually God going down to lift us up. So now, look, you know that. I know that. I mean, and I'm a really.
But how can he be a theologian and say it's too bad that God didn't explain what his name means when he explained what his name means before he even told Moshe what his name was?
Yeah.
It's in the same conversation. What are they separated by 2 or 3 thoughts?
Yeah.
He said, Moshe is saying, if I go and do this and go with you to Mitzrayim to liberate the people from political and religious oppression, and they ask me, what is the name of your God? And Yahweh says, I am.
Yeah,
who I am.
All times. Come in and go. Oh, I also
am who I am.
Letters going back and forth. From any
right.
way,
and I am is I was, I am, and I will be.
Yeah.
And the word that connects them is Asher. I am, I exist to show the way to the benefits of the relationship. Asher. I exist to show the benefits of the relationship, the proper path to walk, to give meaning to life. Asher. Haya. It's the basis of Yahweh's name. He said it, and then he says, tell the children of Yisrael that Yahweh has sent you. That is the only name that I ever want to be mentioned and remembered.
Memorialized. Yeah.
Memorialized. Yeah. I mean, how could he have done a better job of explaining the basis of his name? And Yahweh means I exist. I was. I am. I will be. Boy. It's like the scholar that I had this long-running debate with on the value of the Hebrew Torah, prophets, and Psalms, and the lack of value of the Christian New Testament. And they said, well, in Jeremiah 31, it not only says there's a new testament, a new covenant, but it's not like the old one. So, you can't say there's no new covenant because God himself said there's a new covenant. And you say, didn't you read the part that was written before it? Didn't you read what came after it?
Why would you pick the verse that supported what I wanted to say and took it out of context and then
mistranslated it?
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Didn't you read the part that says that he's going to renew, and Kodesh means to renew, his covenant with Yisrael and with Yahudah, not a bunch of goyim in a church? So, since your church and your religion is comprised of goyim, not Yisrael and Yehudah, and since you're opposed to Yisrael and Yehudah, you can't have a new covenant. It wasn't for you, it was for them. And didn't you read what came after it, where it said, yeah, it's going to be different? And the difference is that I'm going to literally integrate to write my Torah inside of them? How can you have something that negates the Torah when the renewal of the covenant is the wholesale integration of the Torah? I mean,
you can't.
What is with these people? You can't look at the complete thought? You have to take everything out of context and misrepresent it and mistranslate it to prove your point?
Well, yeah,
and of course, once that's pointed out,
and then they
you
look for
ought to be, as a
support.
Christian or as a defender of the New Testament, you say, okay, you're right. I was wrong. There's a consequence of being wrong. I want to be right. There's a benefit of being right. That's what Yahweh just said here. Drop the lie and accept the truth. But no, they can't do it. They just can't do it. You know, there's a consequence of that theologian saying that it's too bad that God didn't explain the meaning of his name, or the consequence of him promoting the idea that his name wasn't introduced until Moshe.
Yeah.
I mean, long before
How
Moshe,
many times have we told
Yahweh's name was all
how
over.
to pronounce Yahweh's name?
Yeah. Yes, of course it was.
And,
Yeah.
and Abram called Yahweh's name.
It was Yahweh talking to Abraham. It was Yahweh talking to Adam. It was Yahweh talking to Noah. It was Adam or Yahweh talking to Abraham. Astonishing that they can't figure it out. But God is saying that the soul is going to suffer of those who speak out against him, of those who act out against him, of those who rebel against him, of those who are wrong, and that's the appropriate recompense. You know, I'm just finished translating the 15th chapter of Yahowah, and I don't want to tell you the consequence for those who are in opposition to Yahweh, which is, you know, the vast preponderance of people in the last days, is horrific. God himself hunts them down and wipes them out. But if you don't want to be hunted down and wiped out by God, here's a clue. Don't rebel against him or his people.
Yeah. Go down the right
track.
track.
You know, I got a better idea. If you'd like to be in his family, if you'd like to be enriched and empowered by him, then read what he has to say. Come to understand what he's offering and asking, and then act upon it. But the thing that just so many people don't seem to get is that God can't be all-loving. God can't want to save everyone. And what he says is just over and over again is that what he's doing in terms of his rejection of religion and politics is appropriate. It's the only way that the earth has returned to Eden. It's the only way that Yahweh can camp out with us. It's the only way that he can support and nourish and love and cherish, enlighten, and enrich his children, is to rid his home of this toxin. So his response, he's saying, you know, I understand it's not politically correct, but it happens to be right. There is a consequence of those who are wrong, and that consequence is bad, and yet it's the appropriate recompense. It's what God must do. Otherwise, eternity in heaven would be no better than what we're experiencing here on earth today. Yeshaya 3:12 will be our last statement to review this evening. My people exploit and oppress. They inflict pain and deal harshly as a result of their immaturity. So then feminine influences shall exercise authority over them because they are just like them. My people, your guides, lead you astray, and the courses of your paths have thoroughly confused and hopelessly befuddled you. Wow. My people, my family, Amani, exploit and oppress. Boy, you just look at the Jews. No people in all of human history have been exploited or oppressed as much as they. And what God is saying is you brought it on yourself. It was a Jew who created Judaism. It was a Jew who created Christianity. It was a Jew, Muhammad, that created Islam. And even if you don't recognize that Yathrib was 3/4 Jewish, that's where Muhammad's mother and father came from. 3/4 of the Quran is bastardized renditions and plagiarism from the Talmud. Rabbis sold him those stories. It is a simple truth. The Jews have been exploited and oppressed because they've sought to impose their will on others. They're the authors of the world's 3 most prominent religions.
Well, they
dealt harshly, and as a result of their immaturity, there's a consequence. I wondered when I first read this, why would he say that one of the consequences that, you're immature, so you're going to have feminine influences over you, exercising authority over you. Listen, God loves women. God created women to create an opportunity for Adam to enjoy and experience love. It was Sarah that was the mother of the covenant. The most influential individual in our lives is Yahweh's set-apart spirit, feminine, our spiritual mother. But when it comes to leadership, what Yahweh is inferring here, I think, is that, this is a generalization now, and it was true largely until recently. Men have a propensity to be more logical, and women have a propensity to be more emotional. And if you're going to promote religious myths, if you're going to be in rebellion, emotion is a much more effective driver of those things than is logic. Logic can't get you there. It would take you away from those things.
Logic is counterproductive.
Emotion can take you there. And so I think that's what he is speaking of. Well, there's nothing wrong with emotion. Emotion's a wonderful thing. Nothing wrong with logic. It's also a wonderful thing. And it's a little bit of the idea of how Yahweh envisioned that men and women, as mother and father and husband and wife, would come together. Because if we were both offering exactly the same thing in the same way, there'd be no synergism. But if we're offering different things that can complement one another, then it's a whole different story. And so, I'm emotional, but I'm far more logical. And
it's a matter of what leads to what. If your emotions are guided by logic and reason, they work in your favor. If
correct.
you're your logic and reason is guided by your emotion, it's counterproductive. It will work
Correct.
against you.
So if you're led by feminine influences, if you're led by emotion, that's a bad thing. If you're led by logic and reasoning and that it leads you to an emotional response, that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
and I think that's what Yahweh was saying.
Well, there's the mother-child thing from Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the Mother Earth, and there's,
mm-hmm.
you know, so all those things are hitting on emotive words to hit your emotions.
Yeah.
So they run throughout everything in the dialogue. So it's a great tool if you want to exploit it. If you want a lot of people.
Yeah. You know, it's if you look at the history of America, it's a profound change when women were given the vote. Now, I'm all for women being equal partners in everything, but when women started to lead, if you look at the change in the country, it's profound. It went a very different direction. Mm-hmm. And by the way, it didn't lead to fewer wars, but more wars. It didn't lead to more solvent and frugal economics, but less so. It didn't lead to more individual responsibility, but to more collectivized authority. And if you track the great delta today between men and women in terms of voting, it is continuing to exacerbate those things. Well, and I don't say that because I have a dog in this fight. I don't. I'm anti-political, as is everyone who's part of the covenant. But it is interesting, nonetheless, to study the influence of women in positions of political authority. It is different, and that's what I was bringing up here. But
watch during a presidential election, watch one of the quote-unquote debates, and not one of them is making a reasonable argument. Not one of them is making a logical argument for their position. No. They're all using emotional appeal to try and convince you that they were the better choice. It's not because here's my plan, here's why my plan will work, here's what we will do. It's all this emotional. Donald Trump, perfect example. He won the presidency by invoking these emotional feelings within people that thought, and same thing with Barack Obama, that he would be the one to change everything. And when you vote with your emotions, you end up bad.
Style over substance.
And we're getting more and more of it.
If you look at this last election where the Democrats gained control of the House, and do I care who's in control of the House and Senate? No. But what I do care about is the reason that the Democrats took the House back, and it was all based upon emotion. It was the number one issue was pre-existing conditions in health insurance. Well, that is a emotional response, not a logical response.
Yeah.
It was everything that they listed, and the Democratic victors listed, and their polling that they echoed that say that prevailed was emotional, and all of the ads that I saw down here in South Florida were all negative. I didn't see a single ad that was positive. They were trying to get you emotionally to dislike one person or another. And so it's an emotional appeal. It's pre-existing conditions. Well, it's just not fair. Well, it's the logical thing to do. If somebody who for whatever reason, and most are self-inflicted, to have the insurance company ignore their previous condition. They have cancer because they smoked. They have diabetes because they're obese. And they have a pre-existing condition that while there should be insurance, certainly for everyone, if the pre-existing condition is ignored, then what you have to do is to raise the cost of insurance for those who have taken good care of themselves.
Yeah.
Well, that's not reasonable. It's not fair. But if you just take the statement out of context, it plays to the heartstrings. Well, that's not fair.
Well, they'll probably have starving babies, to raise money.
This whole idea of that tax cuts were for people, the rich, and they had no benefit to the average person. They were just gratuities to the rich. Not true. In fact, if you look at the consequence of the Trump tax law to an individual, it's really overtly negative. The only thing that was a benefit is business, and if you don't benefit business, you got nothing, and business pays all the bills. It's the source of all income and all tax. And the government doesn't make anything; it doesn't create anything. It's a net consumer. So it's just the whole thing was based upon emotion as opposed to logic. And I was just curious as to what was going to happen at this most recent election because, well, I don't like Trump and I don't respect Trump, and I think Trump's a very dangerous narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, on the things that he has been able to do, forget all the rhetoric, just what has he been able to do? And it's the things he's been able to do are economic, trade, and taxes. And the result of what he has been able to do is universally positive. And in fact, even the liberal media can't say, yeah, he can take credit for those things because he's responsible. So all the things that he's actually done are important, and they're universally positive. And yet, he was repudiated at the polls. What's reasonable about that? By the people who are opposed to what he has done. I don't get it. It's why the idea of democracy doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question.
That's why the jury system doesn't resonate with me. Too many thoughtless people making decisions based upon emotions, their feelings, their opinions. My opinion matters.
The Constitution had right. Under the Constitution, you couldn't vote if you didn't own land. You didn't have skin in the game. You don't get a vote.
Right.
You're a lot more likely to be informed if you have something to lose.
Right. Yeah, that's the way it ought to be. It ought to be to this day that if you are a net beneficiary, then you have no right to dictate by your vote how what somebody else has should be given to you. If you're a net contributor to the system, then you ought to have a say in how the money that you have created and are now offering is used. But we're not going back there. You ought to be a test. You ought to know what the Constitution says. You ought to know what the issues are. You ought to read and be knowledgeable about the things you're voting on, and not swayed by a negative commercial. Because there's no value in voting if you don't know what you're doing. So I happen to have been horrified when I watched the news and saw the reasons that things were had transformed as they did this past week. Yeah, it's really sad. I'm also, I guess I just find it amazing too that the Clintons and the Democratic Party knowingly and deliberately conspired to create the illusion that the Russians were in league with Trump and that Trump was in league with the Russians during the last election. And yet there's no investigation of them. And yet Trump has been under investigation based upon these false allegations that were trumped up by the Democrats for the last 2 years. I mean, I just don't get it. I don't get how a country can make Russia a bad guy and a boogeyman again when America meddles in everyone's elections. And
it's okay if we do it.
The biggest thing that the Russians did is buy Facebook ads that wouldn't fool a fool, which is stupid.
It's sad that they were effective.
Maybe they were.
That says a lot about America.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe they were.
One last little thought about feminine influences as y'all were talking. I'm sitting here thinking about the British Empire, which grew to its greatest heights under Victoria, which lasted forever, and now the second greatest. So probably she's probably been on the throne longer. It's Queen Elizabeth II. And you look at that, and there were, even though they had very little power, they had an image, and the British government supported that image and perpetrated that image. And it's like when you had Victoria over India, you could export them, and you could probably sell it because she's a mother, and she's really going to take care of these poor children that are so ignorant in India that we're trying to help them. I mean, it's just, why else would you have supported a female, a queen, for any other purpose? I mean, it's a ploy, so you can do your dirty deeds and surround it with all this emotional motherhood and taking care of children or whatever. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but maybe there's some merit to that. I don't know, but.
Yeah, and maybe it's also a possibility that there is one decided difference between men and women other than the rational versus emotional, and recognize that both are essential. I mean, it's emotions that keep families together. Emotions are really important, and logic is something that only has a limited appeal in today's world. So it's not that logic is king and emotion is trumped by it. It's not that way at all. It's just that logic needs to lead to proper emotions and proper expression of emotions. But when I've shared this story before, when I went to get LASIK surgery, I asked to have one lens in one eye corrected such that it would be perfect for reading and the other one perfect for distance vision. And the surgeon said, I'd be glad to do that if you're a woman. Would work perfectly for you. But as a man, I would destroy your sight. And I said, what? And he says, yeah, the fact is that men and women, their brains and their whole mental makeup is different. That women multitask, and therefore they're able to use both eyes and choose between them for near and distant vision. Men are focused. They don't multitask. And so as men are focused on one thing, by making their eyes adjusted this way, they're essentially blurred to the point of almost being blind. And to a large degree, it was the nature of our past, where meant you were going to hunt. And you don't hunt when all you've got is a sharp stick, and the beasties that you're hunting are faster and have fangs and claws and horns and all manner of things that can hurt you and kill you. You don't do that unless you're really focused.
Mm-hmm.
And women back in the encampment had to prepare the food, keep the home, and raise the children. A lot of things. Tend to the fire, tend to the home, tend to the children. And so they had to multitask, where the men had to be focused. Doesn't make one more important than the other. It's just different. And if you look at multitasking versus being focused, when it comes to knowing Yahowah, focus matters. Be observant, be focused. Focus your attention on what he has to say. Focus your thinking on processing what he has to say. The more you get into multitasking and doing many things at once, you not only get distracted, but you can be led in different directions. And so there's a possibility that is true as well.
Yeah.
It's just as good.
Yeah. All right, guys, it's a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to be back out and translating. It's maybe this time next week I'll have a new chapter ready. It's been a real challenge because the entire chapter, that Yahowah 15 and 16, are all prophetic about Moab, and none of them can pertain to Moab, the ancient civilization. So all of the places that are mentioned may or may not have been cities in Moab, but they're meaningless as places, and they're meaningful in what their names mean. And so it's been a real challenge to put them together. And there's so many discrepancies in both chapters between the earliest witnesses and the Masoretic text, and some places where the Great Isaiah scroll is clearly wrong. And so you have to deal with that as well. So it was a real challenge to translate some of the biggest challenges I've had thus far, and yet inspiring. And it's like what we're reading right now. So much of what we're reading right now is God doing what he must do, what every father must do, which is to warn their children that there is a benefit of being right and a consequence of being wrong. And to let them know that if they choose poorly, that these consequences are significant. And that's the nature of the 15th and 16th chapter. God's unrelenting. It's amazing that religion embraces the Torah and prophets when the Torah and prophets are so overwhelmingly hostile to religion. All right, guys, look forward to being with you next week. May Yah bless. Happy Shabbat.
Good night, y'all.
Good night.
Shabbat shalom.